Wilhelm Wundt by Ryan Peter Fesso. Wilhelm Wundt was born in the late summer on the 16th of August in 1832 in a small town called Neckarau in the German Confederation. Wilhelm would grow up to become a professor, physician, philosopher, and a psychologist. Wilhelm would also create, in his later years, the first full working research laboratory at the University of Leipzig. He is known today as one of the fathers of psychology and a father of experimental psychology. Wilhelm Wundt was born on August 16, 1832. He was the youngest of 4 children in his family. His father, Maximilian Wundt, was a minister at a Lutheran church, and his mother was a housewife, and her name was Marie Friedrich. In school, at a young age, Wilhelm was a daydreamer at least, and did not receive the best grades. At one point, a teacher told him to drop out and become a mailman. Both of his parents did not care for Wilhelm's daydreaming, so they sent him away to go live with his aunt in Ludwig. This is where Wilhelm began to do very well at school. When he was 19, Wilhelm became interested in brain anatomy at a medical school called Tübingen. After studying and working very hard, he graduated after 3 years and began his experimenting and his research. Wilhelm Wundt studied at 3 main colleges before he graduated. They were the University of Tübingen, University of Heidelberg, and the University of Berlin. At these colleges, Wilhelm studied medicine and graduated after 3 years of long study hours and good, honest grades. After graduating, Wilhelm joined the University of Leipzig as a staff member and was placed under Hermann von Helmholtz as an assistant in 1858. Here, Wilhelm would write and publish his theory of sense perception called Contributions to the Theory of Sense Perception. Then, after he published his theory, Wilhelm got his chance in 1862 to teach his very first course, which was about the history of psychology. Wilhelm and his research covers not only psychology, but also physiology and philosophy. Even though he is known for his studies in experimental psychology, he also did work in other sciences, but he focused mainly on brain anatomy and psychology. Wilhelm Wundt, like all the earlier psychologists in his time, used sensation and perception. The reason that sensations and perception were used is because it is the contact point between both physical and psychological. Wilhelm based the reason for consciousness on sensations and saying that we never really perceive them, but we always have them. His collection of writings over 65 years is hard to put into one category because he had so many different train of thoughts that made his work cover many different topics and sciences. Did this affect his psychology work? In fact, it actually helped. Psychology is a science that uses other sciences to give a better understanding of the human body and its activity. Then, in 1876, Wilhelm received space at the University of Leipzig to start a laboratory for his experiments. The laboratory was an experimental laboratory and was the first of its kind for the psychology world. In a couple of years after he received his laboratory space, several other psychologists came to assist Wilhelm in conducting studies on reaction time. His experiments were to see how long it would take a regular human being to respond to certain stimuli. Wilhelm was very intrigued by trying to describe exactly what consciousness is, and the real reasons behind experimental psychology is to answer that question. His experiments were used to see how long it would take a human to respond to certain stimuli. Wilhelm believed that this kind of test wasn't just a test to test sensation, but a test of externally observable excitations and reactions, that we can see with our own eyes whether it be a muscle or a nerve cell that is being tested, and also the time it takes to react to the stimuli. One of Wilhelm Wundt's reaction time experiments might have gone something like this video.
So the guys are arguing over who has the fastest reaction time. What's reaction time? Well, as humans, we take in information through our senses, smells, taste, that sort of thing. All that's sent to our brain, which processes that information and sends back out a response to our bodies. The amount of time it takes for us to take in the stimuli, process, and respond to it is our reaction time. Now, reaction time is important for a number of things: bicycle riding, playing sports, even taking tests. And we can improve our reaction time through practice, much like baseball players practice hitting fastballs. But genetics is also a factor. After all, we're not all hardwired to hit 100-mile-per-hour fastballs. In other words, how fast you can respond to stimulus. For this, you'll need a meter stick, some paper, a pen, and if you want to actually calculate out your time, a calculator. First, you'll need a partner. You can't test yourself. The tester holds the meter stick up in the air, making sure the 0 mark is on the bottom. The person being tested holds out their thumb and index finger just below the 0 mark. When ready, the tester will drop the meter stick without warning. The goal is to grab it as quickly as possible. Record the distance just above the index finger in centimeters. Be precise to the nearest tenth of a centimeter. Repeat it 2 more times and calculate the average distance it fell. There are a number of other variables that can affect reaction time, so you may try it again with distractions. Or maybe in dim light.
It's getting dark, I can't even see the ruler.
Or any other changes you'd like to try. See what happens to your reaction time. So if you want to know your actual reaction time, you can calculate it. Take the distance the ruler traveled in centimeters, divide it by 490, and then take the square root of that number. That is your time in seconds, in this case 0.18 seconds.
This video does a good job of showing how to test reaction time. They had a set system and added stimuli to see the difference in the time it took to react. Wilhelm used the same technique, such as a set system, in introducing stimuli. Wilhelm claimed that a human soul was irrelevant because humans cannot be understood by the physically observed phenomenons. He believed that there was no psyche and that psychology was just the study of the spirit which denied the spirit. Wilhelm Wundt would become a great professor and would also publish the very first psychology textbook that would be used to study psychology to this day. After opening his very first experimental laboratory, students came from all over to study under Wilhelm. As he began to experiment more and more, the idea and science of psychology became more modern and people began to become interested in studying psychology. Some of Wilhelm's writings are considered to be very important in psychology, and he has contributed to the birth and growth of the science. In 1914, Leonard Bloomfield created a textbook about linguistics, and he used Wilhelm's first psychology textbook as a base. An award was created by the American Psychological Association to award exceptional contributions to the transatlantic psychology. It was called Wilhelm Wundt, the William James Award. Even many of Wilhelm's students would follow their teacher into the science of psychology, and many of them became great philosophers such as Edward Bradford Titchener, who would create the very first psychology laboratory in the United States. Wilhelm would go under criticism for his work in later years because of this idea called structuralism. Another idea that would be criticized was introspection. Both ideas were thought to be right at the time, but proven wrong later.
Modern research owes a great debt to the innovations of such researchers as Wilhelm Wundt. Wundt designed the first controlled research in a lab setting, and his approach was later known as structuralism. In this setting, Wundt and his colleagues studied perception. Some experiments simply involved recording how the subject responded to sounds, or how the subject reacted to the dropping of a large rubber ball. Wundt also developed the method introspection, where he asked subjects to report their feelings and sensations after dropping the ball to the ground. Although Wundt believed that he could gain insight into how the brain works by asking subjects how they feel, this approach was criticized for being unreliable and prone to bias. His methods as a whole were often criticized for being too narrow or subjective. In 1890, William James attempted to explain how consciousness functions with his book, The Principles of Psychology. Because James's theories attempted to explain the function of consciousness rather than the structure, his approach was appropriately named functionalism. James borrowed heavily from Darwin's ideas that mental processes evolve over time to aid the overall survival of humans. Although the early psychologists may have disagreed over how to conduct research, these clashes led to improvements in the science and shaped the methods used today.
There has been great discoveries over the centuries that have shaped modern psychology into what it is today. Wilhelm's ideas aren't totally forgotten, even though some of them are wrong, because he was the base for the science of psychology and the founder for experimental psychology. Wilhelm was a very influential figure in the creation and the study of psychology. He had over 65 years of experimenting and creating hypotheses. He also created the very first working experimental laboratory that was used by many different psychologists and philosophers. He also created the very first psychology textbook that was very influential to the growth of psychology. Wilhelm Wundt died on August 31, 1920, at the age of 88. He died in Leipzig, Germany, near his laboratory at the University of Leipzig. Wilhelm was known as the father of psychology and the father of experimental psychology.